Young ones, no doubt you have many expectations for the life that lays ahead of you.
Yes, prepare for those expectations to be dashed in favor of you becoming a mindless drone.
Be assured that Jehovah wants the best for you and will give you Holy Spirit and the direction you need to make good choices. But what can you do if you make a decision that in the end disappoints you or those who love you? Let's watch the next episode of My Teen Life, How Can I Fix My Mistakes?
Say sorry? Try to offer reparations in some way, depending on how bad the mistake is? I don't know. Do we really need an entire My Teen Life fake YouTuber episode on this?
I started to make a lot of friends at school. And aside from school, I began learning how to rollerblade. So whenever I'd go out to practice, I'd meet lots of different people.
I made some mistakes because of bad associations. We started going out at night and maybe just drinking a little alcohol, but eventually we were drinking a lot. By the time I realized what was happening, I was already really involved. I was 17 years old.
I started being close friends with them. They were everything to me, and I really trusted them. They were doing some wrong things like drugs and using bad language. But I thought, I'm just with them. As long as I don't do what they're doing, it's not a problem.
I began to make excuses, saying that it didn't really matter and that there wasn't anything wrong with what I was doing.
My spiritual routine was just going to the meetings.
I started missing some meetings.
I never prayed. I didn't even know how to do personal study.
I wasn't reading the Bible every day.
In this group of friends, there was a boy who liked me and asked me out. And since all my friends were dating, I thought, why not? So I started dating him, and my parents had no idea. I'd lie about where I was going, what I'd be doing, and who I'd be with. I was pretty much two completely different people. At home I was one way, and with my friends I was another.
Well, isn't that in most cases what being a Jehovah's Witness is all about? Leading a double life. We're watching My Teen Life from the March 2023 JW Broadcasting episode. This is episode 7 of My Teen Life. How can I fix my mistakes? I find this particular segment of JW Broadcasting maddening because it's also contrived. It seems to be almost mimicking the YouTuber vlogger style of doing videos, only whereas YouTube vloggers tend to be able to say whatever they think and speak from the heart, these are typically, or in all cases, going to be younger Jehovah's Witnesses who are having their stories heavily edited and redacted to suit the organization's narrative, and they're in front of the camera knowing that they have to say things that the organization will agree with, that the organization will be able to use in its propaganda. So it's all incredibly forced and contrived. I find it infuriating to watch. But haven't we already hit on a key part of what it means to be a Jehovah's Witness, this internal struggle between wanting to live an authentic life where you can just be yourself and do perfectly harmless things, and having to wear this facade of being this flawless, perfect Jehovah's Witness who is compliant in all areas that the religion demands. And this is especially challenging for young people, as we've seen already something as simple as rollerblading can be sinister in some way, because, hey, you might end up spending time with people who use bad language. I mean, drugs, okay. But what do we mean by drugs? Are we talking marijuana? Probably. Are we talking more serious drugs? I doubt it. I don't know. It just feels as though this particular episode of my teen life perfectly encapsulates the torture of growing up in such a controlling, restrictive religious organization.
I tried to pray to Jehovah, but I just couldn't. I felt ashamed because I knew inside that Jehovah wasn't happy with what I was doing.
My conscience really bothered me. There was a moment when my boyfriend and then some of those friends really let me down. I began thinking about how I didn't have anyone else in my life.
Whoa, hold on there. What did we just see? There was a moment when my boyfriend cut. Some of my friends really let me down. They're just making my case for me at this point. Not only are these young Jehovah's Witness people, who, let's face it, are likely Bethelites. In fact, one of them is definitely a Bethelite, we learn later. Not only are these younger Jehovah's Witnesses having to give this incredibly contrived, forced narrative about their youth, they're also having their story redacted so that she starts to say something about her boyfriend and then it gets obviously cut so that she's talking about something else entirely. That's, for me, just sloppy editing. I mean, what on earth is the audiovisual department doing here? Quite frankly, they are amateurs. How did this make it through the final cut? For her to be on the brink of sharing something that happened with her boyfriend that was probably incredibly innocuous. I mean, even if they had sex, you know, so long as they were both consenting, you know, where's the problem here? Young people have sex, let's be honest. And this, as I've repeatedly explained, is a sex-obsessed organization where there are rules upon rules upon rules surrounding sex that have the effect of psychologically stunting young people who grow up in the organization. Maybe I'm reading too much into this. Maybe she was about to say something completely different, but what an odd and clumsy way of editing this girl's story.
One time, we were all drinking and this girl invited us all to go to her house. I started thinking about what might happen if I said yes to that girl's invitation. I knew that there'd be drinking, drugs, and maybe even something immoral might happen.
Maybe she'd even show you her aquarium.
The next thing I know, she's inviting me to see this aquarium in her apartment. I wonder how many times she's used that line.
So after having not prayed for a really long time, I closed my eyes and said, Jehovah, please help me. I'm just so alone. I don't have anyone. I felt completely abandoned by everyone.
So kind of like how someone feels when they get disfellowshipped and shunned.
So right then and there, I said a prayer to Jehovah, asking him that if he would help me to say no, from that day forward I would stop associating with those friends and serve him whole-souled.
Many times I asked Jehovah to forgive me. I said, Jehovah, you're the only one I have. Please help me. And that's exactly what happened.
After saying that prayer, I felt determined to leave.
He said a prayer asking God for the conviction to say no to a situation that was probably harmless, but that he felt incredibly guilty about. And upon opening his eyes, he felt conviction. Wow, there's some slam dunk evidence of divine intervention in someone's life. And isn't it interesting that this girl, again, we don't know the details of her relationship with her worldly boyfriend, because just as she was about to tell us something, her testimony was very clumsily cut. We don't know what happened there. But isn't it interesting that she was clearly riddled with guilt? She struggled with a guilty conscience. She was continually asking God for forgiveness. And interestingly, when you are a young person and you read the publications on sex and on the multitude of rules that you have to abide by when it comes to sex, one of the reasons it gives for obeying the rules on sex is, if you do this, you won't have a guilty conscience, which is just circular reasoning, isn't it? Because the only reason you have a guilty conscience in the first place is because of all the rules on sex.
I started thinking about everything that I'd done and how I was putting not only my own life at risk, but also my relationship with Jehovah.
I thought, I'm going to talk to the elders.
Since I'm a very shy person, the thought of confessing my mistakes was really difficult.
I talked to them and I told them everything that happened. It was like a weight had been lifted off me.
She talked to the elders and she told them everything that happened with her boyfriend. Well, I bet some of the elders enjoyed that.
I saw that I really wasn't alone after all. I still remember a scripture that they read to me at Psalm 86:5, which showed me that Jehovah's forgiveness has no limits if I'm truly repentant. So I knew that Jehovah would forgive me, but the elders also told me that I'd have to tell my parents, which was very difficult. But I thought, well, I need to speak up. And I just opened up and told them about what happened.
I decided that I was going to talk with an elder, and he read a scripture with me from Philippians 4:7, which says that the peace of God that surpasses all understanding will guard our hearts. So I was able to pray again, knowing that if I really changed, I could feel that peace that comes from Jehovah.
I started studying the Bible for real.
I stopped associating with those friends and started being more involved in spiritual things.
I had the privilege of getting baptized and becoming a regular pioneer, and today I'm serving in Bethel.
I had the privilege of being invited to help with construction projects. But my greatest privilege is the strong friendship that I have with Jehovah, and also having true friends.
I've seen that Jehovah has always been by my side, and even when I didn't want to be with him, Jehovah never abandoned me.
Isn't it encouraging to see how Jehovah gives us just what we need to get back up if we stumble?
He gives us just what we need to completely mess us up as young Jehovah's Witnesses, more like, and make us feel guilty about mostly harmless things that in the real world have no actual negative consequences on anyone, but just because they transgress the multitude of rules that Jehovah's Witnesses have come up with, somehow they're a reason to feel guilty. Somehow they're a reason to feel burdened with a guilty conscience. I'm sorry, all we've seen here, as we see time and time again in this particular series, is evidence of how controlled young people are in this religion. We're talking about a guy going out drinking with his friends. Granted, he was 17, but You know, how much were they drinking? Were they drinking more or less than Toni Morris? Would be my question. Young people do crazy stuff, and they should be allowed, in my opinion, to even make the occasional mistake that's not going to have dramatic consequences. In the case of drinking, maybe you need to get drunk once or twice to understand that it's not a good thing to drink too much. I mean, that was my experience. I needed to know what happened if I drank a 4-pack of lager, of tins of beer, and this is when I was a Jehovah's Witness ministerial servant, by the way. I needed to know what would happen if I drank that much alcohol on an empty stomach. It would make me throw up. So once that happened, once or twice, I stopped doing it because I hated, well, number one, throwing up, and number two, I didn't especially enjoy being hungover either. So obviously you can always take things to extremes, but I'm not seeing anything in either of these stories that's shockingly bad. I'm seeing young people being young people. I'm seeing a girl having a relationship with someone her age who isn't a Jehovah's Witness, and therefore it's wrong. I'm seeing her story about her experience being redacted so that we don't actually hear what happened with her boyfriend that was so terrible. I'm seeing her give a confession to some elders who I can only imagine will have been delighted at seeing a young, attractive girl going into details about her boyfriend and her romantic relationship. I can only imagine. I mean, we hear, I like to think that not all elders will be like that, by the way, so maybe she was lucky in that regard, but I hear way too many stories of elders who get off on this, who get off on having young Jehovah's Witnesses go into details about their sexual or romantic experiences, who ask unnecessarily invasive probing questions and enjoy fixating on the details. So I'm seeing that happening. I'm seeing her being forced to have a conversation with her parents that she didn't feel comfortable having. And more than anything, I'm seeing her wrestling with guilt, with feelings of guilt and a guilty conscience over what was essentially her going rollerblading and hanging out with people her age who were probably just smoking weed and getting into a romantic relationship with someone who wasn't a Jehovah's Witness. That's what I'm seeing in her case. And in his case, I'm frankly seeing a young guy having a very, very typical experience for most young guys. In fact, an experience that I had when I was a Jehovah's Witness ministerial servant.